The ballroom had gone completely silent, not the polite silence of reverence, but the suffocating silence of witnesses watching an empire crack. Red wine bloomed across $4 million of irreplaceable couture, spreading like a wound through ivory silk and hand-stitched gold thread that hadn't been touched since the 1960s. Every socialite, heir, and power broker in Seoul held their breath. Security reached instinctively for their earpieces. And the most dangerous man in the room, the one whose name caused prosecutors to reschedule hearings, stood perfectly still, watching. Not the coat. Her. She was already on her knees. Welcome back to Sonnet Love Stories, my beautiful and amazing family. I'm so happy to have you here once again. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our interesting stories. And please take a quick second to like this video, comment, and share it with someone who loves obsessive emotional stories. It really helps the channel grow and boosts our community. Now get comfortable, because today's story is intense. Let's dive right in. Choi Tae-yoon had attended the charity gala for one reason. The coat. A 1963 Cristobal Moro original, rumored lost, then found in a private Parisian estate, then authenticated by 3 separate houses before it reached Seoul's most exclusive auction floor. He had outbid a Tokyo museum, 2 European fashion archives, and a Saudi collector without ever raising his voice or adjusting his expression. For $0.3 million, dropped like pocket change. The room had applauded with that particular brand of reverence reserved for men who could dismantle careers with a single phone call. He was 36, broad-shouldered in a way that made his perfectly tailored suit look almost apologetic, with a jaw that could have been carved from the same cold marble beneath his feet. He was handsome in a way that felt intentional, sharp, controlled, deliberate, the way everything about Choi Tae-yoon felt intentional. He ran one of South Korea's most powerful luxury investment groups publicly. Privately, he was something considerably darker. Politicians adjusted their calendars around his moods. Corporations quietly restructured when he made suggestions. The underground empire he governed was built not on violence, but on something more terrifying: information. Leverage. Silence used like a blade. He was not a man who felt surprised. Then the backstage doors swung open, a serving tray tilted at precisely the wrong angle, and the world's most expensive garment became a casualty of momentum and gravity. The wine hit the coat like a verdict. Tae-yoon watched the stain bloom across the ivory silk. He felt his jaw tighten exactly once. Then his eyes found the woman responsible, who had been rounding the corner from the staging area where she had spent the last 40 minutes stepping in for a collapsed stylist, and he expected tears. Apology. The rapid, full-body submission he had grown accustomed to receiving from people who understood, even distantly, what his displeasure cost. He got none of that. Rowan Pierce, internationally celebrated fashion designer, restorer of the irreplaceable, and the only person in the ballroom currently moving instead of frozen, dropped to her knees on the marble without hesitation. Not in surrender. In diagnosis. She gathered the hem of the coat with hands that moved like a surgeon's, lifting, tilting, angling the fabric toward the nearest chandelier light with terrifying focus. The room watched her examine the damage with the cool precision of someone who had stared down worse catastrophes and won. She was stunning in a way that felt almost inconvenient for the occasion. Warm, deep brown skin luminous under the chandelier gold. Dark curls pinned messily, but somehow perfectly at the back of her head, a few escaped strands falling against the slope of her neck. She wore a fitted deep green gown that suggested she had initially planned to be an observer tonight, not a participant, but her figure made the fabric look deliberate, wide hips, a dramatic hourglass silhouette. The kind of curves that made tailors quietly grateful. Long brown hair escaped its pins as she leaned forward, and she pushed it back with one absent hand without looking up. She was entirely, completely unbothered by the $4 million mistake beneath her palms. Then she looked up at him. Dark eyes. Direct. Unflinching. No trembling in her jaw. No frantic apology racing up her throat. Just assessment, the same clinical focus she had been giving the coat, briefly redirected at the man standing above her in the kind of suit that cost more than some people's cars. Don't replace it, she said. Her voice was low, unhurried, faintly accented with the cadence of someone who had spent years in multiple cities and kept pieces of all of them. "Give me 6 weeks. I can restore it better than it was before." The ballroom did not breathe. Tae-yoon studied her for 4 full seconds, an eternity by his standards, a man who made decisions in the space between heartbeats. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Not calculation. Something quieter and considerably more dangerous. "Your name," he said. "Rowan Pierce." He already knew who she was. He simply wanted to hear her say it. 3 days later, a black car appeared outside her atelier in Mapo district before dawn. Rowan was already inside, she almost always was, by 5 in the morning, bent over a restoration table with a magnifying loupe, cataloging damage on a 1940s beaded evening coat a museum had shipped from Vienna. She had 3 assistants who arrived at 9. Between 5 and 9, the atelier belonged entirely to her. The low jazz records, the scent of specialized textile solvent, the satisfying silence of a room full of half-finished things that trusted her to complete them. The knock at the side door was unexpected. Her assistant Jisoo handled deliveries. She ignored the first knock, answered the second with a sharp, "We don't open until 9, and turned to find a man standing outside the glass panel who looked like he had never in his life been told when anything opened. Choi Tae-yoon. In a charcoal coat, alone, holding a garment bag with the same careful grip surgeons used with instruments. "You said 6 weeks," he said, when she opened the door. "I'm giving you the coat." She blinked. "You're here personally. I like to understand who I'm trusting with things that matter to me." It was not a threat. It was simply true, delivered with the kind of directness that made Rowan step back and let him in without quite deciding to. Over the following weeks, he returned. Not every day, he was too controlled for anything that obvious. But enough. He introduced himself as a private investor with a personal interest in historical fashion preservation, gave her a name that was technically a subsidiary of his actual name, and she had no reason to doubt him. He sat in the corner chair she hadn't offered him and eventually stopped pointing out that he had taken it without invitation. He watched her work. He asked questions that revealed, over time, a level of genuine knowledge about textile history that she had not expected, and she found herself answering at length and then resenting how easily he drew her out. He was fascinating in a way she found professionally inconvenient. He was precise about everything. Precise about language, about time, about space. He never crowded her workstation. He brought food, not delivery, but specific things, a particular bento from a restaurant in Itaewon she had mentioned once in passing, a specific brand of green tea she hadn't realized he'd noticed on her shelf. He replaced it without comment when it ran out. She told herself it was professional courtesy. She was an intelligent woman. She should have been more careful about what she told herself. By the 3rd week, they were spending evenings talking about things that had nothing to do with the coat. About loneliness. About the particular isolation that came from existing in rooms full of people who needed something from you. About power, what it felt like to hold it, what it cost to maintain it, and whether any of it was worth the particular kind of quiet that followed you home at night. She was careful with her heart. She had learned to be. She controlled every room she entered, not aggressively, but naturally, the way someone moved through a space that they understood completely. She controlled her clients, her employees, her creative process. She had controlled every relationship she had ever been in, and the men who had tried to match her had eventually resented it, and the men who hadn't tried had bored her to silence. Tae-yoon didn't either. He simply remained. Steady. Interested. Patient in a way that felt less like submission and more like strategy, though she couldn't identify what he was strategizing toward. When the atmosphere between them shifted slowly, then suddenly, the way weather changed, it was a Tuesday evening in the 5th week. The coat was nearly finished. The restoration was extraordinary. She had found reference photographs of the original embroidery pattern in a Parisian archive and recreated 3 sections so precisely that the restorer she'd consulted via video call had gone very quiet for a long moment before saying, "I need to sit down." Tae-yoon had been watching her under the work lamp when she finally looked up and found him closer than the corner chair, and neither of them spoke for a moment, and then it was simply too late for speaking. She led. Of course she led. She always led. And he let her, which she found gratifying, and also, if she were honest with herself, which she tried to be, slightly too easy. She was accustomed to men who surrendered completely under her confidence, who became soft and accommodating and grateful, who needed her validation like oxygen. She had unconsciously replicated that pattern here, and he fit it perfectly, and she told herself that was fine. She did not notice how carefully he watched her, how much he catalogued. She did not notice that a man who had spent his life studying leverage recognized exactly what she was doing and was making a decision about when to stop allowing it. The truth arrived on a Thursday 6 weeks and 2 days after the gala, delivered not by confession but by accident. Rowan had a client, a minor politician's wife who moved in circles adjacent to serious power, who had come in for a fitting and stayed for gossip, as she always did. She was describing a recent dinner where the table arrangement had caused a minor scandal, and she mentioned, with the casual cruelty of someone who didn't understand the weight of what they were carrying, the name of the man who had quietly arranged the seating to humiliate a prosecutor who had been looking too closely at certain business dealings. The name she mentioned was not the one Rowan had been given. But the description, the precise, unhurried voice, the broad shoulders in the charcoal coat, the way he made requests that sounded optional but weren't, was unmistakable. Rowan finished the fitting with a steady hand and a face that revealed nothing. She was very good at faces that revealed nothing. After the client left, she stood in the center of the atelier for 7 minutes without moving. Then she made 3 phone calls. A journalist contact who covered financial crime adjacent to South Korea's elite circles. A stylist who worked events and knew every name attached to every room. And a researcher friend who owed her a favor and had access to corporate registry databases. By midnight, she had a picture that was considerably larger and considerably darker than a wealthy investor with good taste in historical fashion. Choi Tae-yoon. Real name. Real face. Owner of record for 17 subsidiary companies and the invisible hand behind 40 more. Publicly, luxury investment, board positions, charity patronage. Privately, the kind of influence that didn't appear in newspaper articles because the people who wrote newspaper articles understood implicitly that certain names were not typed into certain sentences. She had fallen for a ghost wearing a polite man's face. She sat with that knowledge for 2 days. Then she did what she always did when something threatened to destabilize her. She reasserted control. She could not undo what had already happened between them. But she could manage what happened next. She could use distance, precision, and the particular emotional leverage she had spent weeks accumulating to keep him exactly where she needed him, off balance, devoted, and beneath her. She had done it before. She was extraordinary at it. What she hadn't accounted for was that he already knew she knew. He had been told within hours of her first phone call. He had sources in places she didn't know to look, which was rather the point of having sources in those places. He had sat with that information for 2 days as well, and he had made a decision that was considerably quieter and considerably more final than anything Rowan was planning. The man who had spent 6 weeks being patient and accommodating and warmly, carefully soft, who had let her lead, let her set the pace, let her believe she held every card, had decided he was done pretending that was who he was. He arrived at the atelier on a Saturday morning when she was alone. She heard the door and didn't look up from her work table. "I told you to call ahead. You would have told me you were busy." He set his keys on her front counter, a small, deliberate act of settling in that she immediately clocked and immediately resented. "You know who I am." A pause. Her hands didn't stop moving on the fabric beneath them. "I know who you are." "Then say it." She set down her tools. She turned to face him. And in that moment the dynamic between them cracked cleanly down the middle because she looked at him expecting to find the man she had trained to need her approval, and what she found instead was someone she didn't entirely recognize, standing with his full height, his full stillness, the particular quality of attention that had apparently been behind the patient warmth all along. "Choi Tae-yoon," she said. underground empire, political leverage, a network that makes people nervous in the way that suggests they have excellent reasons to be nervous. She folded her arms. You lied to me for 6 weeks. I gave you a name attached to me. I didn't lie about anything that mattered. You lied about who you were. No. His voice was very quiet. I showed you who I was every day. You simply weren't looking at the right things. The silence between them was a different kind of silence than any they'd shared before. Not comfortable, not warm, charged and edged, and full of something that was rapidly becoming irresolvable. I want you to leave, she said. He didn't move. I know. Tae-yoon. You're going to try to manage this, he said. The way you manage everything. Distance, then control, then emotional punishment until I come back on your terms. He tilted his head slightly. I'm telling you now, so there's no confusion later. That particular approach is finished. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You heard me. The temperature in the atelier dropped several degrees, and neither of them was cold. Quick pause. If this story has you hooked, tap like and drop your thoughts below. Now, back to the story. She had been challenged before. By clients, by critics, by rivals who had underestimated her and spent years regretting it. But no one had stood in her workspace and told her calmly, without aggression, without raising his voice, that something she intended to do was simply not going to happen. You don't get to decide what I do, she said. No, but I do get to decide what I accept. He crossed the room, not rushing, not crowding, but moving in the direct, unhesitating way of someone who had chosen a destination. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to maintain the eye contact she refused to break. I'm not the man you've been maneuvering for the last 6 weeks. I let you believe I was because I wanted to understand you. Now I do. And what, exactly, do you think you understand? That you're terrified, he said. And that you're very, very good at hiding it behind control. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Her jaw tightened. Get out of my atelier. He left. But at the door, he turned back once, and what he said was quiet enough that she almost didn't catch it. The code is finished. It's extraordinary. You're extraordinary. And I'm not going anywhere. She stood in the atelier for a long time after his footsteps faded. Then, because she was Rowan Pierce and she did not unravel, she went back to work. But her hands were not entirely steady. The following week was a Cold War. She did not call him. He did not appear. Her atelier ran smoothly. Her client calendar was full, and a fashion publication ran a 4-page spread on her restoration of the Moreau coat, which was, as the anonymous collector who loaned it for photography confirmed via his representative, restored beyond what we believed was possible. She did not think about him. She was very diligent about not thinking about him. On Thursday, her assistant Jissa mentioned, with the careful neutrality of someone trying very hard not to have an opinion, that a Mr. Choi had called to inquire about commissioning a custom piece. I told him you had a 6-month wait list, Jisoo said. Good, Rowan said. He said he'd wait. She said nothing. She went back to her drafting table. She drew 17 lines on her design sketch before she realized none of them connected to each other. On Friday evening, she attended a gallery opening in Gangnam because the host was a client and attendance was professionally non-negotiable. The gallery was full of the particular kind of people who treated art as social currency, beautiful, calculated, dressed by designers who were either Rowan's competitors or her former men's. She circulated with the smooth efficiency of someone who had been working rooms like this since her mid-20s. She did not expect to see him there. He was in the far corner with a small group, a politician she recognized, a tech executive she'd dressed twice, and a woman who was laughing at something Tae-yoon had said in a way that involved placing her hand briefly on his forearm. Rowan observed this from across the room and felt something she refused to name move through her chest like a current. She looked away. She accepted a glass of champagne from a server and turned to engage the nearest conversation, which happened to involve a French architect who was apparently quite interested in her opinion on the intersection of fashion and structural design. She gave him her full attention, which was considerable. She was mid-sentence when she felt it, the particular quality of being watched by someone who wasn't trying to be subtle about it. She didn't turn immediately. She finished her thought, smiled at the architect, and then turned just enough to confirm what she already knew. Tae-yoon was no longer in the corner. He was 15 feet away, the political group abandoned, his attention entirely on her and the French architect with an expression that was perfectly composed and utterly, dangerously clear. The architect said something she didn't catch. "I'm sorry," she said. "Excuse me for just a moment." She crossed the room toward the window, away from both of them, and a moment later felt him step into position beside her, not touching, not crowding, but unmistakably present. "You're at the same gallery," she said, without turning. "My foundation supports this artist." A pause. Who is he? An architect. A client contact. He was interested in more than architecture. Men often are. She turned to look at him then, because she refused to have this conversation with her profile. "That's not your concern." "It is," he said simply. Something shifted in the air between them. Not the combative charge of their last encounter, something quieter. "Rar. Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because I meant what I said. And because," he paused, which was unusual for him, "I have never in my life wanted someone the way I want you. And I'm not interested in pretending otherwise to make you comfortable." She looked at him for a long moment. The city glittered beyond the gallery windows, and Seoul in November was cold and bright, and the man standing beside her had just said, without any of the careful management she had come to expect from everyone around her, exactly what he felt. It was, she found, disorienting. "I don't trust you," she said. "I know. Yet?" He held her gaze. "Have dinner with me. Somewhere public. No pretense, no false name. All of it on the table." She should have said no. She had very good reasons to say no. She was aware of all of them. "One dinner," she said. The restaurant was Private Room Hanamdong, the kind of place where the menu wasn't printed and the lighting was designed to make everyone look like they had nothing to hide. They sat across from each other without the comfortable buffer of restoration work or design theory between them, and Tae-yoon put everything on the table the way he had promised. Not everything. She understood that instinctively. A man who dealt in leverage did not hand it over completely, even to someone he wanted. But enough. Enough that the picture she had assembled from her 3 phone calls developed new dimensions, sharper context, more complicated shadow. He told her how it began. The intelligence network inherited from a mentor who had built it over decades, then pressed it into Tae-yoon's hands at 28 with the instruction to use it carefully. The way power without visibility had become a kind of habit. The way habit had become a kind of empire. The way empire had become a kind of prison, because there was no one in it who saw him as anything other than the weight of his name. Until a woman in an ivory ballroom had looked up at him from her knees, calm as stone, and told him what she was going to do about the disaster she'd caused. "You weren't afraid," he said. "I was absolutely afraid," Rowan said. "I just don't perform fear." "No," he said. "You perform control." She looked at him across the table. "That sounds like criticism." "It sounds like recognition." He held her gaze. "I do the same thing. We are, perhaps, more similar than either of us would prefer." It was the truest thing anyone had said to her in years. She drove herself home. She sat in her car outside her building for 20 minutes. Then she went upstairs, changed into the worn, oversized sweater she wore exclusively when no one was watching, made tea, and sat on her living room floor with a blank design sketchbook in her lap. She drew for an hour without intending to. When she looked at what she'd created, she found a series of architectural sketches, structural, precise, full of deliberately constructed weight-bearing elements. She stared at them. Then she closed the book, turned off the lights, and went to bed. She did not convince herself she was fine. But she was Rowan Pierce, and she had survived considerably more complicated situations than feeling something for a complicated man, and she would figure out the next step in the morning. What she hadn't accounted for was that the morning would bring something she had not planned for at all. Her assistant called at 6:45. "There are people outside the atelier." Just his voice had the careful, controlled quality of someone who had been trained by proximity to Rowan and was working very hard to use that training right now. 3 men. Black cars. "They're not moving." Rowan was already reaching for her coat. "Are they threatening anyone?" "No. They're just standing there." Watching the building. She called Tae-yoon. He answered on the second ring. There are men outside my atelier, she said. I know. No hesitation. They've been there since last night. The silence on the line was approximately 3 seconds. Explain. Someone in my network became aware of our dinner. There's an individual, a man named Park Sung-jin, who has been attempting to locate leverage against me for approximately 8 months. He's identified you as a potential pressure point. She stood in the center of her living room with her coat half on. I'm a pressure point. Yes, because of dinner. Because of considerably more than dinner, he said, with a quiet precision that made her breath catch despite everything. The men outside your building are mine. They'll remain until I've resolved this. You don't have permission to station people outside my building, Tae-yoon. No, he agreed. I don't. I did it anyway. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. We are going to have a very significant conversation about consent and boundaries and the difference between protection and control. Yes, he said. After you're safe. She pulled her coat fully on. I'll be at the atelier in 30 minutes. Your men stay outside. I want inside explaining everything you know about this Park person, in full, without the redacted version. A pause. Then, with something in his voice that she might have called warmth if she were cataloging it. Yes. And Tae-yoon. Yes. Thank you. The words came out quiet, stripped of performance. Just honest. For the men. Even if I'm furious about the method. Another pause, longer. Drive carefully, he said. Please. She ended the call. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she picked up her keys and walked out into the Seoul morning toward whatever came next, which was, she was beginning to understand, going to be considerably more complicated and considerably more real than anything she had managed before. And somewhere beneath the fear and the fury and the complicated knot of everything she felt about Choi Tae-yoon, something that had been very carefully locked moved, almost imperceptibly, toward open. Park Sung-jin, as it turned out, was not a particularly dangerous man in the physical sense. He was dangerous in the way that accountants and archivists were dangerous. He knew where things were buried, and he had no particular sentimental attachment to leaving them there. He had spent 8 months building a case file on Choi Tae-yoon's network, and he had been one well-placed source away from delivering it to a prosecutor willing to act, and then Tae-yoon had walked into a public restaurant with a woman Park didn't recognize, and Park had understood immediately that he had just found his leverage. Rowan understood all of this within 40 minutes of sitting down with Tae-yoon at her restoration table, which was, she noted privately, a strange place to receive intelligence briefings. He laid it out without embellishment. The timeline, the threat vector, the current status of his team's effort to neutralize it through means he described carefully enough for her to understand, but vaguely enough that she couldn't verify, which she suspected was deliberate. What does neutralize mean? She asked. It means he'll be redirected, Tae-yoon said. Toward a different priority. There are people in his own organization who have interests misaligned with his, and I'll be facilitating those misalignments becoming visible. You're going to turn his own people against him. I'm going to make certain information accessible to people who are already motivated to use it. She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light came through the atelier's north-facing skylights and landed across his shoulders, and she thought, not for the first time, that he was the most precisely constructed person she had ever encountered. Every word, every gesture, every degree of revelation calibrated to produce an exact effect. And he was doing that calibration right now, here, with her, and she knew it, and he knew she knew it, and neither of them looked away. What do you need from me? She asked. Something moved across his face, surprise, briefly, then something warmer. Nothing. I need you to continue your work normally. The men outside are sufficient. I'm not asking what you need for the security situation, she said. I'm asking what you need. The silence stretched long enough that she understood it was not hesitation, but the unfamiliar work of answering honestly. I need you to not disappear, he said finally. I'm aware that I have given you significant reason to. I'm asking you not to. She nodded once. Okay. They worked in the same space that morning without speaking, which had been their pattern from the beginning and which she had missed, she realized, more than she had allowed herself to acknowledge. He reviewed documents on his phone. She worked on a commissioned restoration. The jazz record she'd put on Coltrane Low filled the space between them. By noon, Jisoo had arrived and was very deliberately not reacting to the presence of Choi Tae-yoon at her employer's work table. By 2 in the afternoon, the first phase of his countermeasure against Park Sung-jin had apparently produced results, because Tae-yoon's phone vibrated 4 times in quick succession and the tension across his shoulders eased by a perceptible degree. "Progress?" Rowan asked, without looking up from her work. "Significant progress." A pause. "You notice a great deal." "I'm a designer. I read structure." She finally looked up. "The resolution, when it's complete. Will it be the kind of complete that holds, or the kind that creates new problems?" He considered this seriously, which she appreciated. "Both," he said. "Most things are." She nodded. "Honest answer." "I'm practicing." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. A week passed. The men outside the building became familiar enough that Jisoo started bringing them coffee, which Rowan discovered when she arrived one morning to find the youngest of them holding a paper cup with both hands and looking faintly stunned by the gesture. Rowan had a brief internal war with herself and then went back inside and made no comment about it, because Jisoo was entitled to her own moral geography. Tae-yoon came by the atelier most evenings. Not always to stay long. Sometimes just briefly, to confirm she was there, in the particular way of someone who had decided to stop pretending he didn't want to check. She found she didn't mind it the way she would have expected to. What she minded more was the shift in the dynamic between them, which had settled into something she didn't have an established framework for. He was no longer the patient, accommodating man who had filled her corner chair and waited for her to set every term. But he was not aggressive, not controlling in any way she could object to cleanly. He simply took up space, asked questions and waited for full answers. Disagreed with her, occasionally, in the level, direct way of someone who wasn't performing challenge, but wasn't backing down, either. When she tried to manage the temperature of an interaction, he let her try, and then continued in whatever direction he had intended. It was, she found, profoundly disorienting. And profoundly interesting, and considerably more attractive than she had prepared herself for. The catalyst came on a Wednesday evening when she was alone in the atelier long past midnight, finishing a commission for a client who needed a restored piece for a diplomatic event in 3 days. She was close, 2 hours out, maybe 3. The jazz had given way to silence, and the silence had given way to the specific variety of focused exhaustion that she recognized as her most productive state. Her phone showed 4 missed calls from an unknown number and 1 voicemail. She played the voicemail. The voice was unfamiliar, male, deliberately calm in a way that was its own kind of threat. He identified himself as an associate of Park Sung-jin. He explained that regardless of what Choi Tae-yoon believed he had accomplished, certain materials were already placed in certain hands, and the collateral associated with those materials included individuals in Tae-yoon's sphere who had not consented to be used as leverage. Then he said Rowan's address, her home address, and the address of her family's home in Atlanta. She sat completely still for approximately 90 seconds. Then she called Tae-yoon. He answered instantly as if he hadn't been asleep. "What's wrong?" It wasn't a question. He had heard something in the half-second before she spoke. She played him the voicemail. The silence on his end had a different quality than any silence she had heard from him before. Dense. Contained. The particular quiet of someone holding something very large very still. "Are you at the atelier?" he asked. "Yes." "Stay there. Don't open the exterior doors. I'll be 20 minutes. Tae-yoon." Rowan. And in the way he said her name, she heard something that cut straight through every layer of management and performance and careful distance she had built. 20 minutes. Please. He was there in 14. He came through the side entrance she'd unlocked for him and crossed the atelier in the low light with a speed and directness that was entirely different from his usual measured pace, and when he reached her she was still sitting at the work table. And he stopped in front of her and looked at her face for a long moment with an expression that she had never seen on him before, open and urgent, and something underneath both of those that she recognized instinctively even though it frightened her. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. "I needed to see it." Something cracked open in her chest, quietly, like a seam finally giving way under sustained pressure. She didn't say anything. She stood up, and she put her forehead against his shoulder, and he went very still, as if she were something fragile that required absolute care not to disturb. Then his arms came around her, careful and then less careful, and she felt the controlled tension in his frame and understood that he was doing the same thing she was, holding something enormous, holding it still, trying not to break anything by gripping it wrong. They stood like that in the dark atelier, surrounded by half-finished, beautiful things, for a long time. "Your family," he said, eventually. "In Atlanta. I'll call them in the morning," she said. "What do you need to do?" "I need 2 days. A pause. After which Park Sung-jin will no longer be a problem in any practical sense. She didn't ask him to define practical. Some definitions were cleaner left abstract. 2 days, she said. Then I need you to sit down with me and tell me the complete picture of what I'm involved in. Not the calibrated version. All of it. Yes, he said. She pulled back enough to look at him. I mean it. I know you mean it. He looked at her in the low light, her face, her eyes, the way exhaustion and fear and something else entirely moved across her expression. I've never met anyone who meant things the way you mean them. The thing that had been cracking open in her chest cracked a little further. She pulled back. She picked up her tools. Go do what you need to do, she said. I have 2 hours left on this commission. He watched her for a moment. You're going to work. The commission doesn't care about my crisis management schedule. The smallest thing moved at the edge of his mouth. Then he sat down in the corner chair, her corner chair, his corner chair, the chair that had somehow become his over 6 weeks of occupation, and he stayed. He didn't speak. He didn't demand. He simply stayed, in the way of someone who had made a decision and was executing it, and Rowan worked for 2 hours in the quiet and felt, to her own complicated astonishment, less alone than she had in years. The 2 days were, from Rowan's vantage point, quiet. From Tae-yoon's, she understood later, they were the opposite of quiet. Park Sung-jin's network was extensive but not as airtight as he believed, and Tae-yoon's was considerably more so than Park had calculated. By Friday morning, the threat to Rowan and her family had been neutralized with a finality she chose not to examine too closely. By Friday afternoon, Tae-yoon appeared at her atelier and sat down across from her at the work table she had cleared for exactly this conversation, and he spent 93 minutes being more honest with her than he had been with anyone in a decade. Not about everything. She didn't expect everything. But about the shape of it, the scope, the risks, the parts of his life that existed in the shadow economy of influence and leverage and silence. He gave her enough to make an informed decision, which was, she recognized, a form of respect she hadn't expected and felt more than she was prepared to. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. This is a complicated man to be involved with, she said. Yes. No argument. No qualification. There will be more situations like this. Probably. Fewer, if you're not visible as leverage. But yes. She looked at her hands on the work table. At the current restoration beneath them, a 1950s silk organza evening coat, painstakingly rebuilt thread by thread from damage that 3 other experts had declared permanent. She thought about the first night she had knelt on a marble floor and looked up at a man whose name she hadn't yet known and said, without thinking, don't replace it. I can restore it better than it was before. She looked up at him. I don't want you to be someone other than who you are, she said. I spent 6 weeks being furious at you for presenting a version of yourself that was simplified. I don't want to be the thing that makes you simplify yourself further. He looked at her with an expression she now recognized, the one where he was working very hard not to show how much something had affected him. Then don't leave, he said. I'm not leaving. The silence that followed was the warmest one they'd had. It didn't resolve everything, because it couldn't. The architecture of a relationship between a woman who had spent her life directing every room she entered and a man who had spent his life controlling every system he touched was necessarily complicated, and they both understood that instinctively. There would be friction. There would be arguments that had the specific heat of two people who were both accustomed to winning. There would be moments when she tested the boundaries he set and moments when he pushed past limits she thought were clear, and they would have to reckon with both without detonating. But on a Friday afternoon in a Mapo district atelier, surrounded by the artifacts of restoration, beautiful things put back together with care and precision and respect for the original, they chose each other with full information. Not despite the difficulty. Alongside it. 3 weeks later, a fashion industry gala drew Seoul's elite to a hotel ballroom not entirely unlike the one where the story had begun. Rowan attended as herself as Rowan Pierce, designer and restorer, acclaimed and recognized and entirely self-possessed. She wore something she had made for herself, a structured deep burgundy gown with architectural bone work that framed her silhouette like a declaration. Tae-yoon arrived separately. He had his own professional obligations at these events, and they had agreed, without much discussion, that visible entanglement in public required its own timing. She was mid-conversation with a museum curator when she felt him move into her orbit, not touching, not announcing, but present in that specific way she had come to recognize with a precision that still surprised her. She continued the conversation. She finished the thought. She said goodbye to the curator. Then she turned, and he was there, and the look on his face was the kind of thing she now understood to be rare, stripped of performance, fully present. Something warm and complicated and entirely real. "You look extraordinary," he said. "I know," she said, because she did, and pretending otherwise would have been dishonest. The almost smile. "Yes, you do." They stood together in the ballroom, not where anyone could draw easy conclusions, not close enough for photographs that would complicate things, and she felt the strange, settled weight of being fully known by someone. Not the controlled version. Not the managed version. The whole version, difficult and guarded and obsessive and brilliant and occasionally infuriating, and chosen anyway. Later, much later, in the private quiet of his penthouse high above a sleeping city, she told him something she had not told anyone, that the morning she had first seen the Moro coat, before the gala, before any of it, she had recognized it from a photograph she had studied at 22 years old, in a basement archive in Paris, on the first research trip that had made her certain that restoration was her life's work. She had never expected to see it in person. She had certainly never expected to spill wine on it. He was quiet for a moment. "Fate," he said. "Or extraordinary coincidence." "I don't believe in fate," she said. "Neither do I." A pause. And yet, she looked at the city beyond his windows. Seoul at 3 in the morning was not quiet, exactly. It was a different kind of loud, a humming, alive, continuous kind that she had come to find unexpectedly comforting. She had a studio in this city, and a client base she had built over years, and a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered, and she had built all of it alone and on her own terms, and she was proud of it. She was also, she understood now, less interested in doing everything alone than she had once convinced herself. "Don't get comfortable," she said. "Too late," he said. She turned to look at him, and he was watching her with the particular quality of attention she had catalogued at the beginning, the attention of a man who was going to remember everything, and this time it didn't feel like surveillance. It felt like recognition. "I'm serious," she said. "I will still fire you from my atelier if you take the wrong chair. The chair is mine. The chair is mine. You've been occupying it under disputed jurisdiction. I'll buy you a second chair." That is exactly the kind of solution I'd expect from you, and it is exactly as irritating as you'd hope. He smiled fully, genuinely, the way she had seen twice before, and that looked different on him than anything else, like weather breaking. She felt the warmth of it land somewhere central and important. "Stay," he said. Not a request. Not a command. Just a fact he was voicing, the way he voiced all facts, directly, without hedging, on the understanding that the truth didn't require performance. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. The city hummed below them. The night was long and quiet and entirely theirs, and somewhere in the weft of it, a woman who had once controlled every room she entered and a man who had once controlled every system he touched found themselves in the only uncontrolled territory either of them had ever occupied, completely, vulnerably, irrevocably together. She had always treated clothing like architecture, like memory, like emotion stitched into fabric. She understood, now, that people were not so different. That the most damaged things tended carefully, with skill and respect and patience for the original, could be restored better than they were before. She had told him that once. On her knees on a marble floor, looking up at a stranger whose name she hadn't yet known. It turned out she had been right about more than the coat. You made it to the end, and that means you're truly part of the Sonnet Love Stories family. Thank you for your support. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be replying as always, and stay subscribed because the next story is already waiting for you.